The sky was burning. Jane Callahan crouched low behind a jagged husk of a Drovar assault carrier, her rifle barrel resting steady on the twisted metal. Smoke curled into the acid-green sky, carrying the acrid stench of alien fuel and charred flesh. Her trigger finger itched. Not from fear. She'd burned it out of her long ago. But from boredom. 2 squads, 50 meters, Buddy whispered in her earpiece. His synthetic voice had all the charm of a DMV clerk. You're outnumbered again. Congratulations. Ah, thanks, sweetheart. You always know how to make a girl feel special. Jane squinted through her scope and adjusted for wind. Not that there was much left in this dead air. The Drovar's orbital bombardments had burned half the atmosphere to soup. Buddy clicked disapprovingly. You're joking in the face of certain death again. That's the 5th time this week. Habit. Her mouth curled into a smirk as she exhaled, steady and precise. Through her scope, the Drovar soldiers crept across the battlefield in gleaming armor, their insectoid frames twitching with mechanical precision. Their leader, a hulking brute in a crimson war cape, barked orders in a guttural dialect that sounded like metal grinding over stone. Jane didn't speak Drovar, but she'd learned enough to catch their tone. Arrogant, sure of their victory. Target acquired. Buddy intoned. Jane squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked like thunder, ripping through the silent battlefield. A heartbeat later, the Drovar commander's head blossomed into a cloud of blue mist. His body hit the ground with a dull thud, and for a moment, the other soldiers froze. Then the screaming started. 30 hostiles scattering, Buddy reported. Shall I suggest retreat? You may not. She loaded another round into the chamber, her hands moving on autopilot. I didn't come this far to run. The Drovar hadn't expected her to fight back. They hadn't expected her to survive the first wave, or the second. For them, Earth had been a quick victory. For Jane, it had been a slow extinction. She'd watched from orbit as the blue marble of her home turned black under their plasma rains, and something inside her had snapped. Now she was all that was left. The last Marine, the last human, as far as she knew, and she wasn't about to kneel. A Drovar dropship swooped overhead, its cannons blazing. Jane rolled out of cover as the ground erupted in a shower of molten rock. Heat seared her cheek. She hit the dirt, came up on one knee and fired. The sniper round punched through the ship's engine housing, and the craft spiraled out of control before slamming into the valley below in a ball of fire. That's 12 kills in the last hour, Buddy observed. You're making a very loud statement. That's the point. Jane slid back into cover and checked her ammo. 3 rounds left. Perfect. Statement noted. You're now officially the most wanted organism in this sector. The Drovar High Commander has issued an extermination order. They're calling you. Buddy paused for effect. The cursed mammal. Jane barked a laugh. Cute. Do I get a trophy for that? Statistically, you'll get vaporized within the next 20 minutes. Guess I'd better make M count then. She pulled a crumpled photo from her breast pocket. A little boy with freckles and a crooked smile grinned back at her. Charlie, her son. She brushed her thumb over his face and exhaled. For Charlie, she told herself. For all of them. In the distance, a massive shadow blotted out the sickly light. The Drovar flagship had arrived, a colossal fortress bristling with cannons and swarming with fighter escorts. Its comm systems crackled to life across the planet. Human, this is your final warning. Kneel before the Dominion, and your death will be swift. Resist, and we will turn this entire world into your grave. Jane stood slowly, brushing dirt from her knees. She slung her rifle over her shoulder and stared up at the sky, her jaw set. Kneel, she muttered. Not in this life. She tapped her earpiece. Buddy, patch me into their comms. Are you certain that's wise? Never said I was wise. The static on the Drovar frequency cleared as Jane's voice cut through like a blade. Attention, Drovar Dominion. This is Captain Jane Callahan, United Earth Marines. You want me to kneel? She spat in the dirt. Come make me. The line went dead. For a moment, there was silence on the battlefield. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then the Drovar flagship's gun swiveled, targeting her position. "Jane," Buddy said dryly, "you're just insulted an entire species with superior firepower." Jane smirked and chambered her last 3 rounds. "Yeah, ain't it beautiful?" Above, the flagship's cannons roared to life. Below, Drovar soldiers regrouped and charged toward her in a tide of metal and fury. Jane tightened her grip on a rifle and whispered under her breath, "Welcome to the end of the galaxy." Then she pulled the trigger. Jane sprinted through the wreckage as plasma bolts stitched the air around her, each one hot enough to vaporize a man in an instant. The Drovar had brought the whole circus now. Attack drones, strike squads, and towering mechs that looked like metal centipedes with cannons for teeth. Somewhere in the chaos, Buddy's voice stayed maddeningly calm in her ear. "They've deployed a planetary kill order," he said. "Every Drovar within 5 parsecs has authorization to terminate you on sight." "Ah, that's sweet," Jane grunted, ducking behind a half-collapsed wall. "They really do care." She checked her rifle. 2 rounds left. That wasn't going to cut it against an entire Dominion force. But Jane had never been much for fair fights. Fair fights got you killed. She peeked around the corner, noting the terrain. The ruined cityscape sprawled like a carcass beneath the smog-choked sky. Rusting alien architecture loomed overhead, and every shattered window seemed to house a rifle barrel waiting for a head to pop up. "Suggestion?" she asked. "You're asking me for tactics?" Buddy replied, "Statistically speaking, I should suggest surrender. Try again. Run, hide, and pray the Drovar find another mammal to obsess over." Jane snorted. "Cute, but I was thinking more along the lines of duct tape and explosives." She pulled her pack around and rifled through the contents. A spool of alien wiring, 2 energy cells, half a stick of chewing gum, and 1 thermal charge. Not much to work with, but enough for someone like her. She set to work while Buddy sighed in mock exasperation. "You humans," he said, "give you a few scraps and you think you're MacGyver." Jane grinned as she taped the wiring to the thermal charge. "That's because we are MacGyver." It took her 6 minutes to rig the trap. By then, the thud of approaching mech rattled the broken pavement under her boots. She adjusted her earpiece and muttered, "Showtime." When the Drovar strike team rounded the corner, they didn't notice the faint shimmer of a holographic puppy wagging its tail in the middle of the street. Target acquired. One of them hissed, "Proceed with extermination." The lead Drovar raised his plasma rifle and stepped forward, right onto Jane's pressure plate. The explosion ripped through the street in a brilliant flash, sending the mechs flying like toys kicked by a giant. Alien screams filled the air as soldiers scrambled for cover, only to find their own ammunition depots erupting in secondary blasts. Jane emerged from the smoke like a ghost, rifle raised. 1 shot, 2, 3. Each Drovar soldier fell with a neat hole in their exoskeleton. "You're really leaning into this whole one-woman army thing," Buddy remarked. "Better than one-woman corpse," she replied. As the remaining soldiers fled in disarray, Jane scrawled a message in the dust with her boot heel. "Earth sends its regards." "Broadcast their comms," she ordered. "Are you sure?" "Dead sure." The Drovar command frequency crackled to life. Jane's voice cut through the static like a knife. "This is for every city you burned. For every kid you turned to ash. You think one human can't break you? Watch me." Her words echoed across the planet, bouncing off relay satellites and seeding panic in Drovar troops. "Jane," Buddy said with a hint of concern, "you've officially terrified an entire species." "Good." She jammed a fresh clip into her rifle. "Maybe now they'll stop thinking we're all house pets." But even as she spoke, her eyes flicked skyward. The Drovar flagship still hung there, vast and terrible, like a predator circling its prey. And it wasn't alone anymore. New signatures flared across Buddy sensors. "Jane, I count 17 more capital ships entering orbit," Buddy said. "And they're bringing death crawlers." "Great." She cracked her neck. "I haven't had a proper workout in weeks." "You are, as always, utterly insane." "Hey, it's a talent." Below, the heavy thuds of approaching death crawlers began to shake the earth. The air was thick with dust and static. The Drovar weren't pulling punches anymore. Jane crouched behind the smoldering wreck of a mech and lined up her rifle. Through her scope, she watched the crawler's armored carapace glint as it crawled over the rubble, pincers clacking. "Buddy," she said quietly, "play something inspirational." A beat of silence. Then the first chords of AC/DC's Thunderstruck roared in her earpiece. Classic human battle hymn. Buddy quipped, "Damn right." She inhaled slowly, centered the shot, and squeezed the trigger. The sniper round struck true, piercing the crawler's eye-slit. The machine spasmed as its internal power core overloaded, detonating in a sun-bright ball of fire. One crawler down. 16 to go. The other crawlers paused for a split second, hesitating. "Jane," Buddy said flatly, "I believe you've just given a tank an existential crisis." "Good. Maybe they'll stop crawling." But the Drovar weren't known for hesitation. The crawlers surged forward in unison, their cannons powering up with ominous hums. Jane slid another round into the chamber, her lips curling in a grin that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Let's dance." The first crawler fired, and the world went white. The world was on fire again. Jane darted between the skeletal remains of alien skyscrapers, her boots pounding against cracked pavement, every step ringing like a countdown. Behind her, the guttural roars of death crawlers reverberated through the city's hollowed bones. Plasma bolts sizzled past, scorching stone and air alike, but she didn't flinch. The line between fear and adrenaline had blurred hours ago, maybe days. She couldn't tell anymore. 5 crawlers left. Buddy reported crisply in her ear, his synthetic voice smooth as ever. "Correction. Make that 4. One tripped over the burning husk of its predecessor. You caused a logistical snarl among their heavy armored division. Congratulations." Jane smirked, skidding to a halt behind an overturned transport. Never underestimate human ingenuity. Buddy hummed. "Or clumsiness. You've turned an alien death machine into interstellar slapstick. Shall I cue circus music?" "Save it for the funeral playlist," she muttered, wiping soot from her brow. Her fingers danced across the rifle's scope, adjusting for distance. In her sights, the nearest crawler clambered over debris, a shimmering shield flickering to life around its carapace. Jane whistled low. "That's new." "They've adapted," Buddy said grimly. "They're learning from your attacks. Might I suggest adapting yourself?" "Adapt, huh?" She popped a piece of gum in her mouth, chewing thoughtfully. "Yeah, I can do that." As the crawler's plasma cannon whined, charging for a shot, Jane bolted from cover, sprinting toward a rusting support beam jutting from a collapsed tower. The beam trembled under her boots as she scaled it, her rifle slung across her back. The crawler tracked her ascent, pincers snapping, but she was already airborne, leaping from the beam's apex onto the crawler's armored hull. It shrieked, a sound like tortured metal, and thrashed violently to shake her off. "Jane!" Buddy's voice spiked. "This is not within acceptable parameters for survival." "Define acceptable," she growled, driving her combat knife into the crawler's optical array. Sparks flew. "Because I'm feeling very alive right now." The crawler's shield flickered as Jane ripped open a panel, exposing a tangle of glowing circuitry. She yanked free the thermal charge she'd duct-taped earlier and jammed it into the core. "Buddy, light it." "With pleasure." A split-second flash, and the world erupted beneath her. The blast hurled Jane across the street like a rag doll. She hit the ground hard, air whooshing from her lungs. For a moment she lay still, stars dancing in her vision. Then the rumble of approaching treads snapped her back. 3 crawlers remaining, Buddy said. "All are aware of your unique tactics." Jane rolled to her feet, coughing. "Good. Saves me from repeating myself." Above, the Drovar flagship hung in the sky like a blackened sun, its cannon swiveling. Over the comms, a cold voice rasped in guttural tones. "Human, you will kneel. This is your final command." Jane spat blood into the dirt. "I don't kneel. Never have. Never will." She checked her ammo. 1 round. "Buddy," she said, her voice quiet now, calm as still water. "How's their orbital core holding up?" A pause. Then Buddy's tone changed just slightly. It's heavily shielded, but there's a thermal exhaust port, classic design flaw. A direct hit could cascade through the reactor. However, your chances. Yeah, spare me the math. She exhaled, letting her heart slow. In her mind's eye, she saw Charlie again, his gap-toothed grin, his messy hair sticking up in every direction. The memory was sharper than the pain in her ribs, stronger than the burn in her legs. This wasn't about survival anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. "Jane," Buddy said softly, "you don't have to. Shut up and line up the shot." The ground quaked as the remaining crawlers advanced, plasma cannons humming like a choir of devils. Jane knelt in the rubble, steadying her rifle on a broken column. Dust settled. The air stilled. She could hear her heartbeat. "Target locked," Buddy whispered. "Let's make history, pal." She squeezed the trigger. The shot streaked skyward, slicing through clouds and debris, and for a long, impossible second, it seemed to vanish into nothing. Then the Drovar flagship's core detonated in a blossom of white fire. The shockwave rolled across the battlefield, flattening crawler and soldier alike. Even the alien war machines froze in place, their circuits sparking as a chain reaction swept through their network. Jane lowered her rifle. Her arms trembled, her vision blurred, but she didn't fall. "Buddy," she rasped, "status report?" The AI's voice was hushed, almost reverent. "The Drovar flagship has been reduced to atoms." Jane allowed herself the ghost of a smile. "Told you I don't kneel." But in the distance, new lights flared in the sky. Fresh warships entering orbit, 10 times larger than the one she'd just destroyed. Buddy's sensors screamed, "Jane, they're bringing the Overlord." Jane swayed on her feet, staring at the glowing horizon. "Good," she murmured. "I was starting to get bored." And as the first alien landing pod slammed into the soil around her, she loaded her last clip and whispered, "Let's finish this." The earth split open as the Overlord's drop pod slammed into the ground, sending out a shockwave that flattened everything in its radius. Dust plumed skyward, thick and choking, curling around a massive armored figure that rose from the crater. The Overlord was a monstrosity of metal and flesh, twice the height of any Drovar soldier, its exosuit glowing with the faint heat of a mobile fusion core. Serrated blades sprouted from its gauntlets, and a gleaming rifle taller than Jane rested across its shoulders like a toy. Its voice rumbled over every frequency at once, deep and metallic like the growl of a dying star. "Human, your insolence ends now." Jane stood her ground at the edge of the blast zone, her boots planted in cracked pavement. Her rifle felt impossibly small in her hands. Her muscles ached, her side throbbed from a hairline rib fracture, and her ammo counter glared red. 3 rounds remaining. "Buddy," she said softly. "Odds." 0.0%, he replied flatly. "But you'll go out in the history books. Under worst tactical decisions ever." She snorted, rolling her shoulders to loosen the tension. Hell of a way to get famous. Or dead. Why not both? The Overlord advanced, each footstep sinking deep into the ground. With a hiss of escaping steam, its helmet split open, revealing a pale, eyeless face crisscrossed with scar tissue and cybernetic implants. "You are a cancer on the galaxy," it growled, "the last of a primitive breed. Kneel, and I will let you die quickly." Jane spat into the dirt. "Not much of a sales pitch. You got anything else?" The Overlord raised a clawed hand and snapped its fingers. A dozen Drovar elites materialized around the crater, their weapons humming to life. "Jane," Buddy said, his tone sharper now, "this is the part where humans typically run." She tilted her head, eyes narrowing. "Not my style." The first Drovar soldier lunged, plasma blades slicing through the air. Jane ducked, sidestepped, and slammed her rifle but into its jaw, shattering the exoskeleton with satisfying crack. She pivoted on her heel, firing a round straight into the second soldier's chest plate. It sparked and tumbled backward into the crater. 11 left. The Overlord watched her with eerie stillness, its voice dripping contempt. "You cling to life like it means something. But this is all the galaxy will ever remember of your kind. A final, useless tantrum before extinction." Jane reloaded and leveled her rifle at his eyeless face. Good thing I'm a sore loser. She squeezed the trigger. The bullet streaked toward the Overlord, but fizzled out against a shimmering energy field. It didn't even blink. "Buddy," she muttered, ducking behind a toppled pillar as the elites opened fire. "I'm gonna need a bright idea. I had one, but you wouldn't like it. Try me. There's a fusion tank behind you. One shot will rupture it. A large enough explosion might breach the Overlord's shield. Might. 95% chance you'll be caught in the blast radius." Jane exhaled slowly. "So, you're saying there's a 5% chance I make it out?" "Jane, better odds than usual." She darted out from cover, bullets snapping at her heels, and sprinted toward the tank. Plasma fire grazed her shoulder, searing through her jacket, but she didn't slow down. The air grew hot and thick as the fusion core whined dangerously. "Jane, stop," Buddy pleaded. "This isn't strategy, it's suicide." She smiled grimly. Difference being? Behind her, the Overlord raised its rifle and took aim. "Human," it said, voice booming like a war drum. "Die crawling." "Not today." Jane planted her boots, spun on her heel, and fired her last round straight into the fusion tank. The world went white. The explosion rolled across the battlefield in a blinding wave, tearing the air apart and hurling Drovar soldiers like leaves in a hurricane. Jane felt the heat slam into her body, saw the light bloom behind her eyelids, and heard Buddy screaming in her ear. Then nothing. Silence. When the dust settled, the fusion tank was gone. So was the Overlord's shield. Its massive body lay sprawled in the dirt, armor cracked and sizzling, one clawed hand twitching weakly. Jane coughed, her vision swimming as she pushed herself up on shaking arms. Blood dripped from her temple into the dust. "You still alive?" Buddy's voice crackled weakly in her ear. "Define alive," she rasped. "You're still sarcastic." "That counts." The Overlord stirred, its torso rising in a shuddering motion. One red, I flickered dimly as it glared at her. "You will kneel," it croaked. Jane limped toward it, each step heavier than the last. She stood over its broken form, her shadow cutting across its face. "You first," she said, and then she drove her knife straight into its core. The Overlord let out a choked metallic scream before collapsing for good. The red glow in its chest faded to black. For a long moment, there was nothing but the sound of her own ragged breathing. Then Buddy's sensors pinged. "Jane," he said, voice quieter than she'd ever heard it. "You did it. The Dominion fleet is retreating. You've won." She slumped to her knees, staring at the sky as smoke curled around her. "About damn time," she muttered. "Jane," Buddy said after a pause, "incoming transmission. It's human. Survivors. They're asking for you." Her breath caught. "Put him through," she whispered. A crackling voice came over the line, hesitant but unmistakably human. "This is Commander Reyes of the Exodus Colony. Is anyone out there?" Jane closed her eyes and smiled through the blood and grime. "Yeah," she said. "This is Captain Callahan, and we're just getting started."